Chapter 3. The Law of the Angels. The law of the angels is that they must do the very best they can upon every occasion and with every assignment and at all times. Their second best will never do. This is an open law that can be lived by every mortal on this earth who desires to live it. And by accepting it and believing it, one will be lifted into a higher status of advancement. To apply this law of the angels in one's life demands that all careless living be left behind, for in every casual, inconspicuous act the law must be employed. No slipshod habits can be tolerated under this law. And it is amazing how quickly the law, when applied, develops a meticulousness of character and habits that is irreproachable and quite natural of execution. Under its application, slovenly actions and careless, often shameful little hidden, sneaky traits are soon eliminated. One automatically develops a degree of self-respect which demands his best at all times. Under this law he begins to live up to the inborn goodness within himself. He also develops dignity, poise and a deeper compassion for those with whom he comes in contact. And as poise increases, it expands into majesty as the law of performing every act as perfectly as possible is fulfilled. And majesty is the manifestation of the law of divinity. Only one's best becomes acceptable to the individual who takes hold of this divine, higher law and lives by it. His second best is never good enough as one begins his upward march toward ever higher goals, as new standards unfold before him and are themselves reached in fulfillment. It is true that such a one will become a perfectionist. But he will only be demanding perfection of himself, not of others. In his own efforts to always do his very best he will find a satisfaction. He will also find the method of his own growth, happiness and fulfillment. As one applies this law in his life, his mortal, negligent, thoughtless, careless and often reckless and harmful actions become intolerable. As he applies the law, it soon becomes a very part of himself, his wonderful, advancing self. It is a beautiful law when lived. It holds the keys of dignity and of charm and of true nobility. And any who will live this law will have the recognition of the angels and will be assisted upon every occasion in fulfilling it and in perfecting themselves. This divine law of the angels is really the law of man's innermost nature. It is the law of himself as he opens up his soul to the fulfilling of himself. By applying this divine law in his daily life, one soon comprehends the satisfying, rewarding power of its miraculous beauty, for it brings its own rewards. My father, who was a very wonderful man, died when I was 19. He approached his end after a long, lingering illness. It was just a few days before his death that he called in his children, one at a time, to extract from each a very noble and exacting promise, according to his love and wisdom. And I alone, of all the children, could not make that promise. To me a promise was a most sacred obligation. I realized fully that if I made that promise I would be bound by it all the days of my life, even if the years ahead proved it to be erroneous and harmful. I was greatly distressed as I looked into my father's expectant eyes. I would have given my life to have made his last hours more happy and serene, but I felt that it was more than my life that was at stake. It seemed that a knowledge deeper than his wisdom and understanding and far beyond my own forbade me taking such an oath. With deepest regrets I answered, I cannot make that promise. I can only promise you that I will do the very best I can all the days of my life. I did not realize it at the time, but by that promise I was forever bound by a higher law and a far greater promise than my father had desired to extract from me. I had unknowingly taken an oath to live the law of the angels. It took me years to grow into it. But it was in the living of that law that I found the divine wonder of God's love. It was in moments of dynamic fulfilling of the law that angels came at various times to minister unto me. And looking back I realize fully that had I made and kept the sacred promise my father desired of me, it would have ruined my life and would have closed the door to the fulfilling of my destiny. I would have betrayed myself and God also. By the promise my soul was prompted to give I have grown to rejoice in the law of the angels and to understand it perfectly. I have learned of the sublime wonder and unfolding glory held within its depths. I have learned to love this law, which alone can bring complete attunement with God and the divine powers of heaven. Gradually the conscious awareness and the effort to fulfill the promise I made to my father became a part of my existence. I finally reached the point where I never had to give it a thought, though it is a law which requires conscious effort and awareness at first. Then, as one grows into it, the very strength and powers of heaven are released into his life. And that life becomes an ever-increasing melody of advancement. The law of the angels is the first law of heaven. And all that is required is that each one live it according to his own strength and understanding. But live it he must if he would attain unto the heights. As one takes hold of this law and begins to apply it in his life, he may find, to his consternation, that his best is not nearly as good as he had always thought. His best, no matter how good, will need much practice to bring perfection. It is like the woman who, every morning, refused to let her small son dress himself. He would cry and plead for the privilege of putting on his own clothes and lacing his own shoes, and with inconsiderate impatience, she would brush his pleadings aside because his best was not acceptable. She did not realize that his best would increase into better, and that only by doing his best, though imperfect, could he possibly grow into perfection. The pattern of his life was thwarted for many years because his childish best was not acceptable. This law of the angels is one of natural fulfillment as one's best increases day by day into a fuller, more abundant life, as newer and higher goals and powers continually become manifest. This is the law of perfection, and one must grow into it as he develops his abilities. It was a long while before I understood how powerful and far-reaching was the promise I gave my father. He had not intended to extract such a promise from me, and I realized, at the time, that he was disappointed in my failure to accept his terms of life. But all the days of my mortal life, and beyond, the gratitude I have for that promise I made, sings in my soul. To live the law of the angels was a far greater promise than my father had requested, though he realized it not. This higher law demands, even when one is eating alone, that he eats with the worthiness and dignity of partaking of a great banquet attended by many. And though the meal is humble, and though the fare is poor, it will be a banquet and angels will attend. If, in every personal, private act one lives according to the highest laws possible for him to fulfill, from the point where he stands, he will never be left forsaken and alone in time of need. If, in every public action and every required assignment, one performs his task as though it were a divine obligation, it will become just that and be crowned with the approval of heaven. And even when he thinks he stands alone, he will be standing in the presence of divinity, and angels will rejoice over him. Such is the law of the angels, and such is the law of man's innermost being, for it is the law of the kingdom of heaven, which is within. He who lives this law will soon learn of its power as he grows into it. One does not fulfill this law in an instant. This law must be lived in order to develop graciousness and that true inner worth that eliminates disreputable, debased, careless habits. This law is a law of beauty and power and divine attainment. It is a law one must, of himself, elect to fulfill. It can never be forced upon one. And as one lives the law, it becomes his own. By applying it in his life, he exalts himself into a higher vibratory existence, in which the angels may be called to attend him in every moment of need and during periods of unusual performance, for he will continually grow into more and more dynamic situations. Upon those extraordinary occasions, when much more than usual is required, he will know that angels are there rejoicing over him and lending their strength to his to fulfill the appointed task. This is a sacred, wonderful law to live by and to fulfill. And as one lives it, his power to perfect and to glorify increases. That which you persist in doing becomes easy to do, not that the nature of the thing has changed, but your power to do has increased. In living this divine law of the angels, one can never let himself or another down. Neither can he be caught in some humiliating, shameful act or circumstance. His whole life develops into an harmonious procedure of purest joy and honor as he grows into the use of the divine powers of heaven. The laws of the land and all secular, mortal laws, to which one may conform through his chosen earthly adherences, requires no such meticulous, astringent compliance. All the laws of the creeds demand only the cleansing of the outside of the cup, for they contain only the outside, temporal laws and mortal regulations. These higher inner laws, when lived, clean not only the outside of the cup but the inside as well, for they are inner laws. And they are chosen and performed through a complete willingness to do all that is required and a little more. They must be selected and accepted by the individual who enters this higher order of existence. This law of the angels is not a compulsory law, but it is a law that pertains to that straight and narrow path which so few find and are willing to travel. On their assignments of service and love, the angels are sent forth to assist all who call or who are in need. Yet the person or group to whom they are sent may never acknowledge or know or even accept that assistance. This is the law that supersedes that continual demand to be appreciated. In this law one never works for the worldly pay of appreciation. It is the law of doing one's very best in every circumstance and upon every occasion without a thought of reward, even in thanks. And though the angels may be actually rejected in their assignment, yet it does not change their law in the least. The angels are still required to fulfill their law of loving service to the very best of their ability. Of them it is required that each must send out the very highest vibrations of love and healing power that is possible for them to generate, collectively or individually, though this is the law of each individual. This is not the law to be seen of men. This is the innermost law of man's own being. It is the law by which man grows into his own highest possibilities, subtlety, unnoticed and unacclaimed, yet dynamically, eternally powerful. This law is power. And as one begins to live by it, his power to do will increase until all perfection is attained. The aspirant must live according to his highest inborn ethics. From the moment he takes upon himself the marvelous wonder of this journey toward higher goals, he can never again stoop to do little underhanded, slovenly things or perform sneaky little actions in the hope that he might be able to get away with them. Every little spiteful act and vengeful thought must be eliminated as one fulfills the laws. In this law, love increases and understanding compassion becomes the power of existence. And the second great commandment will be fulfilled, naturally and beautifully. No one on this earth, or in the universe, for that matter, ever gets away with anything that is unworthy of himself. In striving to put across some unworthy or dishonest act, one first of all fails himself. And in doing so he places himself upon the lower level of deficiency and stamps himself with the seal of mediocrity. He may even place the seal of the animal status upon himself. And there are those who sink even lower, below the level of animals. Each and every unworthy, inferior action places its seal of inferiority upon the individual, as the higher laws of his own glorious fulfillment are rejected and ignored. The divine gift of free agency, so graciously bestowed upon man from the beginning, gives him the right to select the kingdom he will inhabit and the type of individuals who are like unto himself as eternal associates. Each individual selects his own kingdom or realm or level by his compliance to the laws pertaining to that level. Thus it is each man's right to reach upward into the realms of eternal light as he fulfills the greatness of himself. Or he can degenerate into the lowest state and become even less than mortal in his bestial habits and unworthy actions. The laws are his own. They always have been. The law of the angels is always there waiting, like an engraved gilt-edged invitation to enter the higher realms if one so desires. And no matter how lacking one is, or how insignificant or deficient, one can begin to increase his power and goodness and mercy and understanding by living according to the highest laws of his own inner nature. By living the higher laws, one must increase in joy and virtue and beauty and the divine power of his own fulfillment. The privileges of heaven and the sublime, infinite powers thereof are held out continually to all who will only accept them and live by them. As one lives by the higher laws, he automatically proves them, not only to himself but to all with whom he associates. Live the laws and you will know of their truth. And knowledge is power. It is by living the higher laws that all things become subjected unto the individual, for the promise is, and all things will become subject unto you, both in heaven and on earth, the light and the life, the spirit and the power. What greater promises could be given? This is the promise of God as one begins to fulfill his own divinity. And the laws pertaining thereto are man's to apply in his life. They are his to grow into, to rejoice in as he evolves from the man kingdom into the God kingdom. And they are yours. If you doubt, ask God to help your unbelief. If you are weak, ask Christ to give you strength. These books have been written by the finger of God, as the author of the Odes of Solomon proclaimed. And that finger has been held out to you that you might take hold of it and stand upright to view the wonders and the desirability of the higher realm. But this work is only to give you the vision. It is up to you to take your own, perhaps faltering steps, alone. No one can take those steps for you. Neither can another walk this divine pathway for you. The journey is your own. And it is as different from the present mortal estate as the crawling position of an infant is beneath the achieved advancement of the child who has learned to stand upright and to walk. If it seemingly takes too much effort to break through the confining shell of your complacency, then you must remain in your infant crib of conformity and unprogressiveness. You will be required to continue sleeping in the crib that has grown too short for you to stretch yourself in, with the covering that has become too narrow for comfort or warmth. If you are content with this condition, and with a milk diet, or worse, the banquet of vomit, then no one can help you. It is a painful, harrowing experience for a child to be weaned from the milk and drawn from the breasts. But for development it is a necessity. It is also an anguished experience, taking those first trembling, doubtful steps. Yet in that achievement is contained one of the great triumphs of a lifetime. I know, because I remember. Those fearful, halting steps exalt the baby from infancy into childhood. And it takes so few of them to give the child confidence and the proficiency to go on thereafter, upright and eager to meet the challenge of life. And it takes only one step at a time to begin traveling along this higher, spiritual road, as one begins to apply the law of the angels in his life. Each act one performs, and usually one only performs one at a time, he can use the law, even as step by step he learns to walk. It is only by one's own exertion that he can possibly grow into the full stature of himself, a child of the Most High God. Come, beloved, the way is your own. Just do your best, always. And if you fall, help will be sent to assist you until your feet are planted safely and surely upon the way that leads to your own divinity.